Hey, sorry for the late arrival, everyone. I accidentally started my IG Live on my personal IG and not the SCL one. So I'm over here now on the proper one. Uh, this is what happens when you're writing your book and you go, oh, it's 5 o'clock. IG Live. So here we go. The word of this week is Ubuntu. It is a phenomenal word that we should all know in the U.S. It is, most people think of it as a Zulu word, but Zulu is part of like a larger African linguistic family, and that family is Nguni, and so even outside of Zulu, the word Ubuntu is well known. But people think of it in relation specifically to South Africa because this word was used by Nelson Mandela, other South African freedom fighters, and Desmond Tutu to end apartheid. And so I really, really like this word. And like many of the words that we pick, it's hard to translate into English and other languages. But this one has a pretty nice like proverb phrase that it resonates with me quite a bit. So to really simplify Ubuntu, you could say it means I am because we are. And that is just a 5-word phrase that we all just need to sit with and think about how simple it is and also how profound it can be at changing how you see the world. And so, like when I saw that 5-word phrase for Ubuntu, it immediately made me think about Rene Descartes and the Cartesian worldview that has dominated European thought since the 1600s. And that philosophy is articulated in another 5-word phrase, which is I think, therefore I am. And it's really, if you sit and like think about these two phrases, how simple they are, but how diametrically opposed they are in every way, you can see how you would have a completely different view of the world and who you are via which one of these phrases you choose to embrace. And so let's start with Descartes, because that's kind of what everybody that has received a European influenced education, whether they acknowledge it or not, have been bombarded with Cartesian ways of seeing the world. And so I think, therefore I am, places one's own existence in their mind. Like if you have a brain that has a capacity to think that you exist, that is proof of your existence. And so your existence with this framework has no connection to the world around you. You don't exist because of the oxygen you breathe. You don't exist because of the people who nurture you. You don't exist because of the food. You don't exist because of the relationships. You don't exist because of the place in which you live. You only exist because your brain is capable of telling you that you exist. I can't really articulate what just an astonishingly basic and absurd idea that is, because like when you are a child, when you are 5 months old, 3 months old, like I don't remember any adults that really remember the thoughts they had when they were like a newborn person. That's just not a thing I've ever heard of. But they existed when they didn't even know their brain had thoughts. They can't remember any thoughts. Their brain didn't say, ooh, I exist. They don't have any recollection of that, but they existed. So that clearly you exist in the world before your brain believes you exist. So it's just an absurd idea. But it's also like a really dangerous one, because what it also does is it makes your perspective of the world entirely contingent on your thoughts. So if you think that you are, if you have a thought, I exist because I am, the next thing you're going to think of is like, what am I? And then you could say, I'm Catholic or Muslim or Jewish or Protestant or white or whatever. You could say, I exist because I am that thing. And then you can make a really easy logical jump to say somebody else doesn't exist in the same way or an equal way because they're different. They're not, I'm Catholic, they're Protestant, therefore my brain says they don't exist in a way that's as good as mine. So now I come up with the logic that I can just do whatever I want to them because they're like sub people. That's a logical extension of the Cartesian way of seeing the world. And so if you look at it, I think therefore I am, it's whether it's intentional or not, it's just going to stoke division. And it's going to legitimize division. And it's going to make division an essential part of existing. And so so much of colonization and how Europeans chose to see the other people around the world that they interacted with during colonization was steeped in the Cartesian way of seeing stuff. And does get slightly tricky because colonization did exist before Descartes, before that phrase happened. But just like Ubuntu was a phrase that was that was hard to articulate. It didn't have one precise philosophy. It was just a way that people interacted with the world. And then at some point it became a philosophy. It became defined. It became a bit more structured. And so I don't think that Rene Descartes had this idea and it was a total vacuum. It was obviously a manifestation of how Europe was interacting with itself and the rest of the world. So you look at it and you can see a lot of the division that the U.S. has right now is based on this Cartesian way of thinking. The division that happened in South Africa, a lot of this Cartesian way of seeing the world. The Boers came into South Africa or colonizing, wanted to divide, keep their European Boer space and then the African space over there and divide it up and blah, 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 all that stuff. So now if we look at Ubuntu and we apply these 5 words, I am because we are. Now, your existence, your humanity, isn't determined because of your thoughts. It's determined due to your capacity to look at another person and see a human being. And for that person to look at you and also see a human being. That framework is such an alien concept in a lot of the colonized world, and especially in the US, that you can see how bringing this philosophy into such a divisive space could just change the entire dynamic of a society. And Nelson Mandela is one of the many people in South Africa that used Ubuntu to take down apartheid. And one of the things that a lot of white South Africans were amazed with was how after going to being on Robben Island for decades and being imprisoned and beat up and all this stuff, he came out and he still treated white South Africans like they're human beings. He didn't want to get retributive justice. He wanted to create an equitable type of justice. And they're that was so profound that he had the capacity, the humility, the compassion to do that. But that compassion, humility comes from a philosophy of Ubuntu. And it changed the dynamic. He didn't respond in the way, the divisive, Cartesian, othering response that was expected because there's a different philosophy that's defined from these 5 words. And the South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission also, which was chaired by Desmond Tutu, also used the philosophy of Ubuntu to help have a reconciliation of the society, to start forging equality and treating everybody as equal and not be so focused on punishing and retribution. And it's just a very, very profound philosophy. And before I open up for questions, one thing I was thinking about is that when John Lewis passed away on Friday, and I end up having to write his obituary for the BBC. And so I was thinking a lot about how in America we don't have the word Ubuntu. We don't think about it. But our champions, are the people that we celebrate, in many ways, are people that try to articulate this or exude this philosophy without the language and largely without the culture that birthed that type of philosophy. Like, we live in an ethnocidal space. It's based on division, and we're trying to create concepts and philosophies that counter that division. And I was thinking of John Lewis and how maybe what could the impact of civil rights in America be if we use Ubuntu as a word that was just like commonly applied, instead of we have a corrupted discourse in America that's all ethnocidal. And I just thought about that. I was like, the person that passed away that we're all sad about, his philosophy was one of Ubuntu. We just as a people don't articulate those words, don't articulate that word, and we don't have that discourse. And it also makes me think of, clearly, the transatlantic slave trade. Not many people came from the southern part of Africa. That's quite far away. It definitely happened. People definitely went around the horn. But for black people in America to not have the language of these liberating African philosophies because of ethnocide is also a really profound idea, and it's tragic when you think about it. But yeah, that's Ubuntu. If anybody has any questions about it, this is the opening up for questions time. And thank you, Luna, for reminding me to do this on the SCL one and not on my own Instagram, because that's not how it's supposed to work. I was literally writing my book, and I got my alert. Time flies when you write. But any questions about Ubuntu, any thoughts, please type them in, and I'll do my best to answer these. Thanks for joining us, Jack. And yeah, so that's the word Ubuntu. And let's see it's really just amazing. It's five words. It's 5 words, and if you sit on it and think about it, and if you you can repeat it to yourself. It can be a mantra, and it's really, I really like it when philosophy, yeah, sure, Ubuntu and COVID. Okay, that's a great one. So, right now, the U.S. is a nation that's all about individualism. It's all about being an individual and having your individual freedoms and just doing whatever you want all the time. And America just says that. And America spent a lot of time trying to articulate that makes sense, where if everybody does what they think is in their best interest, then we'll all be doing stuff that's in our best interest. And it's that's just absurd. And the only, tragically, the way to prove that absurdity is when you actually get confronted with reality in a very stark way. And COVID has done that. And so this individualistic idea of America, which is quite Cartesian, because people think that they want to do something, and therefore they think that that's good, and so they're going to do it, and they just believe that bad things won't happen to them. It's completely disconnected from reality and the environment, and just determined based on the thoughts they have in their head. So it encourages you to do insane things. And so with COVID, people, they'll say, I don't want to wear a mask, or COVID won't get me. I'm sure I'll just go outside and it'll be fine and there won't be a problem. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. And it's hard to get people to do something collectively if we've all indoctrinated people to only think about themselves in an individualistic way and to do stuff based solely on the individual thoughts they have in their head without any onus towards the collective good. And since America is ethnocidal, there really hasn't been an idea of a collective good. It's always been a divided good where one group gets to exploit the other. But with Ubuntu, if you think I am because we are, well then it's already the collective is woven into it. So you would be less inclined to go outside and not wear a mask because you know that if you don't wear a mask, that could get somebody else sick. And if they get sick, then you're sick. Because if I am because we are, if we are sick, then I am sick. And that just it wouldn't match up. You would have a philosophy that encourages people to work collectively for the greater good of society. And this would be very beneficial for COVID because COVID can get everybody. You're nobody, regardless. We look at the data, and clearly, if you are like a rich person who can escape to the Hamptons and stay in your mansion and exploit other people so that they can provide you with services, and you don't have to go to work, you can cloister yourself from COVID a bit better than people who have to go to work and live in densely populated areas. But COVID doesn't care about like how rich you are or any of that kind of stuff. It cares about the collective capacity of a society to fight it. And America has no desire to have like a collective will. And that's why we're having so many problems with it. And if we had a philosophy that was more I am because we are, and less I think therefore I am, we would be so much better at coping with this. You wouldn't have all the videos on Twitter of people going into grocery stores and all sorts of stuff without a mask on, and then those people complaining that they're being shamed or something, or something negative because people are telling them they have to wear a mask. You wouldn't have this absurdity of, like, my family lives in Georgia, where the governor of Georgia is making it illegal for any sort of municipality in the state to mandate that people have to wear a mask. He wants people to just individually decide to wear a mask. And it's like, that's just outrageous. That's why we'll have surges. That's why, a lot of these quite individualistic, conservative-dominated states are having pretty significant spikes because they just think that COVID won't get them. And so then they just act like it won't, and then COVID gets them. And so the Cartesian worldview isn't grounded in reality, but I am because we are is very grounded in reality. Jack, perfect. Would love to hear you speak to Ubuntu and existentialist essence, perception through others. Fantastic question. All right, so I do view Ubuntu as like an existentialist philosophy. If you go on the internet, they try to call it like African humanism, but I think it's just existentialism. And one of the key things of existentialism is the idea of existence precedes essence. And with the Cartesian worldview, essence preceded existence. So your essence is basically anything that you decide gives you meaning. And so like your essence could be Catholicism. Your essence could be the fact that you're really good at playing a sport. Your sexual orientation could be your essence. All sorts of stuff can be an essence. And everyone has an essence. Having an essence isn't a bad thing. But if essence precedes existence, then you make your essence a bad thing. If I have an essence and I go, basketball's the best, I play basketball all the time, basketball's the greatest thing ever, and anyone that doesn't play basketball is just a horrible person. That's just absurd. That's just a crazy idea. But that's the types of thinking that you have with essence preceding existence. Now, Descartes has that. Existence preceding essence is talking about, my existence precedes my essence. And I will say, Europe does have a very individualistic perspective, and so I would say Ubuntu, I believe, takes this and makes it more collective, where you then acknowledge that your existence is as a part of a group. Like you aren't an individual, you aren't just by yourself and alone in your existence, and your perception of yourself is through others. But this is also a key thing. Like the others that perceive you are always gonna change. And so like your existence, there is a fluidity in that, and that fluidity is gonna happen just due to aging. Just like the existence of Barrett Pittner when I was 14 is way different than the existence of Barrett Pittner right now. Most people that knew me when I was 14, that know me now, would say that I'm still basically the same person, different, but they'd also say that I'm completely different now than I was then. My existence changed. And the others that are around me now, that are around me then, are different people. But at the same time, if I hop on an airplane and I go to some other country, those people are going to perceive me differently too. So the perception that I have, that people are going to have of me, is always going to change. The key thing is that as I get those different perceptions, that I still believe that I am because we are. Like I still exist because I see them as a person, and they still exist because I see, them as I see them as a person, they see me as a person. And that dynamic, so long as we foster that wherever we go, then we'll be doing pretty well. And that's like another dynamic of existence, where it's not individualistic. And so it's an even greater removal from being focused on your essence, which is just so individualistic. And I think a lot of people also try to rely or stick to their essence because they feel like they have a sense of community because of their essence. And then that definitely is a thing that happens, but we're all going to be parts of some sort of community. Like whether we like it or not, we're part of this American community that does all this horrible ethnocidal stuff, and we have an obligation to try to make it better. And Ubuntu is an idea that I think can help make it better. John Lewis tried to make it better, So I hope that answered your question, Jack. But let's see, Ubuntu. Yeah, existence precedes essence, and I am because we are. I think that is a perfect counter to the Cartesian essence preceding existence, and I think therefore I am. And so, how can we practice Ubuntu more in our daily lives, and how can we integrate Ubuntu in politics? Good question. So, let's see. So, actually, Luna, this is a good one, because I think the other day you and I were talking about gentrification. And so, I live in a neighborhood, it's fairly gentrified. I don't really mind, I like living around different people. The thing that is annoying is that, the newer people that move in don't act neighborly. They don't say hi to you. They don't form relationships. They just are these strangers that live right next to you that just kind of want to act like they have nothing to do with you. And that's just so weird. Why would you want to live in a place where you don't even know the name of the people that live right next door to you? But with gentrification, I think this happens a lot because people come into these places and they don't want to be part of a community. And they think that makes sense. They think it makes sense to not really even look at their neighbors. But if you have Ubuntu, then you'd be more inclined to say hello to your neighbors. And the problem with an American society is that even if you say hello to somebody and see them as a person, there's really not any guarantee that they will see you as a person in return. There's a very big risk of these introductions because we're just not conditioned to see people as people here. So at an individual level, you have to be brave enough to see people as people at the most micro interactions possible. That can be handshakes and hellos and all sorts of stuff like that. And it's funny to say, I think I've always tried to do that. I didn't have the word Ubuntu as possible, but the amount of times, like, as a black person in the South, you could tell that when somebody was interacting with you, before they said hello to you, they already had, like, judged and had an idea of who you are. And I always wondered why that happened. And many people, it was like, you could see it was almost like a defense mechanism. Like, there wasn't, like, an understanding of trust. So they had to imagine who you were before they talked to you so that they could get an idea of whether you were someone that they could interact with or not. Which is just, like, the strangest thing. And I just thought that was just an outrageous amount of unnecessary effort. And that it just made way more sense just to say hello and then decide if that person, like, is worth your time or not. But all that extra pre-thought, what's going on with that? And so, like, I just always say hello. I just say hello to people. And if, based on, like, the very objective, normal, no thought applied to it hello, I just see you as a person. Let's see how this goes. If you seem all right, then we'll chat. And if you don't, then I'll just go hang out with other people. And I think it's that simple. To how do you practice it in our daily lives. With politics, it's more complex, but the key thing is, and STL does a lot of this, is the injection of new language that people can, like, embrace. I think Ubuntu, the word itself, could be impactful politically, but the obstacle is that I don't think America wants to believe that our society is as troubled as South Africa, even though we are more troubled in many ways, to warrant their discourse to solve our problems. I think there's still, like, a delusion about what America is, and that delusion makes it people less inclined to have the problems, to solve problems. But I think, but to be more specific with regards to politics, with the Democrats, I think Ubuntu would be quite helpful. I think Democrats find so many ways to have, like, little, like, petty divisions, and some of them are petty and some of them aren't petty, but, like, we just try to infight way more than we should. Like, if for say we're talking about, like, healthcare or student loans or whatnot, like, without a doubt, there are candidates whose policies regarding, like, healthcare and student loans I like, more than others. But I also am really clear that, like, the Republicans don't have any concepts or ideas regarding healthcare or student loans, so I don't want to waste much energy stoking division within the Democrats when the alternative is just a zero. And so maybe Ubuntu within the Democrats, where people are wanting to see each other within their own side as fellow humans and not progressives or this or that, could be quite helpful. I don't think there's much help for relating to Republicans with Ubuntu, but I think America actually numerically is getting more and more people that would align themselves with Democrats, and if they can cultivate a language that makes it easier for them to get along and not find, like, the small divisions and exacerbate them, then we wouldn't need to spend much time working with Republicans anyways. So I think that's how Ubuntu could be helpful with politics. Another thing could be, like, within the African American community, we've always talked about, like, reparations and the notion of, like, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and all this types of stuff to, like, shift the culture. I think Ubuntu could be really impactful with that, with regards to monuments and museums and textbooks, all that kind of stuff. I think it could be quite helpful for how do we address that and how do we confront the truth of our not so pleasant society. But yeah, And so that's that. I hope that answered your question. And yeah, that's Ubuntu. But it's one thing I like, and I might have said this earlier, but it's just really great that it's just like a simple 5-word phrase. It's great. Do you think individualism can ever be eradicated in the U.S.? I feel like it would be extremely difficult to convince people to put the lives of others before themselves. Oh, yeah, like it's really hard to do this in the U.S., but I think the difficulty for the U.S. is that there's just not a language for, I think there's not a language for people to even articulate communal anything here. I think so this is kind of grim, but like I've been reading like some Orwellian stuff, and like there's this idea of newspeak where they make the language like overly simplistic, and the simplicity of the language makes it hard for people to have like complex ideas, and by there being no complex ideas, people can't even think up ideas that would counter the status quo. Like, I think in many ways America has done that because we don't have the language for collective anything. We just have the language of individualism and the language for saying why individualism is bad. But we don't have a preponderance of language to say why collective anything is good. And so people don't have the capacity to even imagine how any sort of communal structure could be very, very beneficial. And so it's a granular process. You have to like inject new words and philosophies in the space and see how people adapt and incorporate them into their lives. I think one thing that's quite important, and this is why the newsletter, The Word, is so significant, is I think a lot of the immigrant communities in the U.S., like their languages have just an abundance of these communal words that they don't spend that much time thinking about because they've just always had them. And we need them here. And so, Ubuntu's one of them, So with our current discourse, I think it's impossible to get people to stop thinking in an individualistic way. But you have to change the language. So like ethnocide helps change the language. Like that word right there can really quite easily make people see how detrimental individualism is, and also like how their individualism derives largely from the capacity to divide people, where like the individualism that America embraces is really one that's like propped on the backs of people of color as they do all the labor that these white individuals don't want to do. And so I do think it's possible. We just have to approach it in a way that America's never thought about approaching anything, which is like philosophically and linguistically, without like a dominance of like white European ideas as the bedrock of our culture. And I think we're pretty fortunate that there's a lot of people from around the world that live here now that we can take facets of their culture to make something that actually is sustainable. So I think it's possible, but I don't think ethnocidal American society cultivates that possibility. I think you have to cultivate that possibility from something that's outside of America and then bring it into America in a way that Americans can be receptive to. And like that's partially the theory of like the word and why I started with European words, because most Americans know those languages more than the others. So if you can bring in a word from Greece or Germany that people could easily go, that doesn't feel too foreign, but the idea that that word is actually something that's really foreign from the ideas that exist throughout the US, now you're starting to like crack it open a little bit. And so, yeah, I think it's possible, but it's you just have to start shifting the philosophy and the culture. I hope I answered that question, Jackie. And yeah, but I think Ubuntu has a lot of potential to benefit the US because a lot of our leaders that we look up to that have made our society for the better, whether it's Barack Obama, John Lewis, Martin Luther King, they articulate essentially like the principles of Ubuntu. So let's use the relationships we have around the world, the philosophy that they bring that comes to America, and see if we can use it to like reinforce and strengthen principles that we already believe. And I really just think that the simplicity of I am because we are can be quite profound, because anyone can say that and you can repeat that to yourself all the time, especially it's like it can become a mantra, which is a really fascinating thing, because with philosophy far too often it's I gotta read 500 pages of a book, 600 pages of a book, and those pages aren't that fun or eloquent. It's just like boring, and so to condense it into 5 words, it's pretty great. That just doesn't happen that often. And I think Descartes' capacity to shorten his into 5 words, and frankly, he did it in Latin, and I think it was 3 words. It's like, I think it was cogito ergo sum. It's 3 words. Boom. It really makes it easy for people to adopt something when it's that simple. And so, no, I'll say, the more I've thought about Ubuntu, the more it's made me think about my work and how I can refine it and modify it and can make it more concise. And so, yeah, it's a good word, real good word. And tragically, the timing with John Lewis made it even more resonant this week. But yeah, if you guys don't have any more questions, this was a good one. Sorry for being a little bit late. I think everyone knows I don't prioritize or pride myself in being the most tech savvy. It just happens. But yeah, if that was it, this was a really good week. Hope everyone has a good rest of their week, and I'll talk to you later. Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye.